because we never start late. Just kidding. Sorry about that, folks. We had a closed session item which ran a little bit longer and will run a little bit longer yet. But I'd like to call the City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting to order. If you'd all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. From my colleagues, do we have any changes to the order of the agenda? Seeing none, Jeff Maltby, our city manager, told me before he had to step out for a minute that staff did not have any suggested changes either. So we will move on to item 4, which is report from closed session. But as I alluded to a minute ago, we actually didn't complete our closed session topic, so we adjourned it. We will be going back into closed session at the end of this open session, and then we'll come back in here to let everybody know who's still around what the report from closed session is. Item 5 is a pair of presentations, and it's to honor some very important people in our community. We want to recognize the outstanding work that a number of commissioners in San Carlos have done for the community. The commissioner, the commissioners here that were being honored tonight are finishing their terms or have finished their terms on a number of our commissions. Many people don't understand how important commissions are to the council, but in addition to acting as an advisory body, they also are an important conduit for the public to be able to have a say into how public policy gets developed. So what I'd like to actually do is to call everybody up here, and we'll hand out the proclamations and make a few comments, and I'm sure my colleagues will have a few to say as well. So if I could have Commissioner Josh, I'll call names and ask people to come up. Commissioner Josh Zaror from the Economic Development and Advisory Panel, Museum Board Member Neil Chichizola, and I apologize if I mess up anybody's name, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Commissioners Wendy Turner and Adrian Werner, Planning Commissioner Sharon Bergman, who I saw there a second ago, and Transportation and Circulation Commissioners Suzanne Emerson and Sandy Herschel. If you can all come up front. So you can all turn around and face the audience because they're actually more important than the council on these kind of things. So, as I said a few minutes ago, the work you guys do and the rest of your colleagues is incredibly important, and it's valued not only by the community and by staff, but most importantly of all by the council. We often talk about how we need to figure out ways to utilize all the talent we have even more than we do, and that's an ongoing source of discussion. But nonetheless, all the work you guys do is very, very much appreciated. So I would like to hand these out, and then I'll pass the microphone down, and people can make whatever comments they wish to do. Josh. I don't think I have these in alphabetical order. Neil. Wendy. There you go. You're welcome. Adrian. That's Adrian's not here tonight. I didn't think so. Shannon. There you go. And Suzanne is not here. Sandy is not here. Sorry, Sandy. For some, wow, total mess up on my part. All right. So, as I said, with that, I'm going to hand the microphone down, and we're welcome to make a few closing comments.
Sure. Thank you very much. Mine will be short. It's been my honor, my pleasure. 6 years. I was just saying it's gone really fast. Sandy Herschel, I was on the Transportation Circulation Commission. I'm just happy we accomplished a lot, and there's a lot ongoing. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to the council and the city and city staff. It's been a pleasure.
Wendy Turner, Parks and Rec. It's been a pleasure over the last couple of years to be a part of the Parks and Recs Commission. There were a lot of interesting meetings. I think we accomplished a lot, and I look forward to seeing what the next group can do.
Josh Zaror, Economic Development Advisory Commission. I've been very proud to serve on the Economic Development Commission for, I think, 6 years. It's been a real pleasure to be an active member of our community in a different way. And most of all, I want to thank Al and Martin and some of the other staff who've now departed. But it's great to know that such good people work for the city and have all of us in mind. Thank you.
Neil Chicazola, Museum of San Carlos History. It's an honor to receive this award tonight. I've enjoyed the last 15 years on the museum board and enjoyed working with the group, and I'll continue to be with the museum as a villager and a docent. Thank you.
Hi, Shannon Bergman, Planning Commissioner. It has been truly an honor for the last 6 years, and it's gone by extremely quickly to know what's happened in the last 6 years. I just saw the Transit Village go up, which was the very first thing that I ever sat at the dais on. So to see the growth that's happening in the community and all of the wonderful things that are going on is really nice to know that I've had some part of. And I want to really take a moment and thank staff and the council, but staff specifically, because of how much hard work that they do before it even gets to us on the Planning Commission or to the City Council. The city has a wonderful, wonderful people backing it up. So thank you very much.
You know, I forgot to mention one other thing that's a great thing about being a commissioner is it's oftentimes an entree to serving on the council. So I look forward to perhaps seeing some of you, if you've decided you haven't been punished enough, that you can run for the council. Because I have it on good authority that actually works, right, Sarah? Okay, good. Thank you very much. And as I said, I wanted to give my colleagues a chance to say some words too, if they wish. So.
Sure, I just want to thank you and congratulations on finishing your terms, and thank you for your service to our community, and hope you just keep staying involved in other ways as well.
I've served on a couple of commissions and I know how much work they are, but people don't understand that the commissions and what they do and what you do for this city are really the backbone of everything. It's all of you are sort of unsung heroes, and when people see the final product, they don't realize how much work that staff put into it, how much you put into it, and how much we put into it, although lots of times they only see what we do and they only see our decisions. So just from me personally, I very much appreciate your service and hope you'll stay involved.
And I'd like to express my gratitude as well. What makes San Carlos great are people like you who are willing to step up into leadership roles and get the feedback from the community and translate that into something actionable. And we live in one of the most amazing cities ever, and I believe it is in large part due to the works of your efforts. So thank you very much.
I will echo Laura's comments. I know that it's a big time commitment to serve as a commissioner, and you know, sitting on this side now, I can say how much we really do rely on the input from commissions and commissioners, and thank you so much for your time and your service.
Thank you for making us all look good. And we will make sure that Suzanne and Adrienne get their proclamations as well, because we thank them as well. The second proclamation tonight is to recognize July as Parks and Recreation Month. I'm going to give Amy a second here. One of the things I like about having a staff person when we're doing these things is I don't have to say very much, so you get to talk about this instead. And actually, no, I think you've been doing a great job in your role with Parks and Rec and all the other things in our community that fall under your purview. So I'll let you talk about how wonderful July is as Parks and Rec Month.
As most of you can imagine, summer is Parks and Recreation's busiest month, and we already feel like I'm head into summer with about a few weeks into it. We kicked off our Music in the Park series a few weeks ago. We have already had a movie in the park. We have another one coming in July. We kicked off our summer camps a few weeks ago. So I do encourage you this summer to get out into nature, visit one of our parks, have a picnic, hike a trail, come to a movie or come to a concert, get your kids involved in our programs. We have tons of programs for all different types of interests. So come be a part of our Parks and Recreation this summer. And thank you for the acknowledgement recognition.
You're quite welcome. Amy, remind me to talk to you about a cool program I saw down in Santa Cruz this weekend that looks like we might be able to steal their idea. All right, the next item on the agenda is public comment. This is for members of the public to address the council on any topic they wish that's not already on the agenda someplace else. I have, let's see, I have 2 speaker cards for items not in the agenda, so I'll announce both the names and ask folks to come up and address the council. You'll have 2 minutes. There's a timer with a countdown display there to warn you when you start running out of time. But the 2 speakers tonight are Liron Morad and Chwin Cosgrove. Oh. Sorry, Crystal also reminded me there is one other one as well, which we'll add to the list. Anyway, you're on.
Good evening, council members. My name is Liron Morad. I'm a resident of the 2300 block of Howard Avenue here in San Carlos. I'm here tonight because our block has become a dangerous and very busy thoroughfare. It's used as a shortcut for drivers to get to and from Alameda, down to El Camino or even to 101. There have been accidents on our street. Car flipped over not that many months ago. A car ran through a fence a number of years ago. Windows, side view mirrors being hit, dogs and cats being killed. We've had a lot of near misses. I have a 5-month-old, and I've almost been hit by trucks going down the street multiple times. We actually have a stop sign at the end of our block that I believe Council Member McDowell many years ago, maybe not many years ago, worked to install. Unfortunately, that's not being respected either. And drivers who are busy in rush hour choose to go on the left side, pass you in the traffic circle, and not stop at the stop sign. Children are afraid to bike on our streets. They bike on the sidewalk if their parents let them. Many parents don't. We've had enough. We need to change the traffic flow on Howard Avenue. It's too dangerous. So the residents of the 2300 block of Howard Avenue got together, and we have a petition to add what's known as a hybrid barrier at the end of our street. This barrier will allow, and I'll pass this so that it goes into the record, but also the council members have a copy, will allow emergency vehicles to pass through, because there's a fire station at the end of our block, but will prevent cars from using Howard Avenue as a way to shortcut their routes when they're rushing to and from work. Our petition asks that the council please put this on the agenda for an upcoming meeting so that we can discuss this, so that you can hear from the residents of our street, and so that something can be done to help make the 2300 block of Howard Avenue safe once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to give this to the clerk.
Certainly. Thank you. Is it Liron?
Liron, yes.
Liron, okay, thank you. Thank you, Liron. Next up is Chwin Cosgrove, followed by David Pollock.
Good evening, Chairman and the council members. My name is Chwin Cosgrove. My family, my husband and 2 sons and I live in San Carlos since 2006. What brings me here today is to call on your support to send a strong message to Chinese Communist regime that our city stands for freedom and human rights. Condemn the persecution and killing of the Falun Gong practitioners and urge the Chinese regime to stop the persecution. July 20th of this year marks exactly 20 years since the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, have savagely persecuted Falun Gong practitioners in China. Anyone known to practice this peaceful exercise is detained, sent to prison, or tortured to make them to give up their beliefs. And some have been murdered for their vital organs, the unspeakable crime against the humanity. For those of you who don't know Falun Gong, it's also called Falun Dafa. It's ancient Chinese spiritual discipline that teaches truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, along with meditation exercises. And the practitioners overwhelmingly experienced dramatic improvement in the health, in the mental clarity, and the overall sense of well-being. And because its effectiveness, Falun Gong has spread very fast and wide, but just word of mouth in China during the 1990s, which brought the persecution by the CCP because they thought it's as a threat to its control. And in June 2019, just last month, after a year-long investigation, the Independent People's Tribunal has unanimously concluded that the prisoners of conscience are being killed in China for their organs on a significant scale. The main target, including Falun Gong practitioners as well as Uyghur Muslims. I'm looking to work with you to do something special to solemnly commemorate this date, July 20th, to remember those who have lost their lives to torture and forced organ harvesting, and send a strong message to CCP to end the persecution of Falun Gong. Thank you.
Thank you, Xuan. David Pollock. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Chair and council members. This wasn't my initial topic of that I wanted to discuss this evening, but the previous speaker reminded me that everyone is invited on Friday next to the Redwood City Library. We're holding a vigil, Lights for Liberty, against the everything that's going on in the border, the concentration camps, detention centers, et cetera, and hope everyone can join me. The topic I wanted to raise this evening is about public comment. In an informal polling of neighboring communities, 5 that I checked with, every council and planning, at least planning commission, has public comment of 3 minutes. And San Carlos is a bit of an outlier of public comment for 2 minutes, which might want to rethink, because the council can, at its discretion, say we have a lot of speaker cards this evening, so we're going to cut it down to 2 minutes or 1 minute, or this is a very important topic and we have extra time this evening, so we can expand it to 5 minutes. But I think that the standard for San Carlos should be shifted back to 3 minutes, and then at the chair's discretion at the meeting changed as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the council on a topic not on the agenda? If there is, feel free to step up and you can fill out a card later. Seeing none or no further, we will move on to the next item. Oh, actually, pardon me. Before we do that, I have a procedural question for my colleagues and for Jeff and Greg. Liron had asked or had petitioned that the council look into traffic situation on the 2300 block of Howard. And we have this new process by which agenda stuff is dealt with by us submitting items to staff ahead of time, and then it comes up on the agenda item. Does that also, I don't remember, does that also govern the council giving direction to have, for example, the Transportation and Circulation Commission look into something?
Well, we have an item now on our standing item on our agenda on 11 for agenda setting. But if it's the consensus of the council to have the TNC look at it, you could just direct staff as the mayor to bring that forward to them, and then they can bring it up on their appropriately on their agenda to look at.
Would it be cleaner if I brought up this question during the agenda setting item?
I think that's, if the council is thinking that, I mean, if it's possible the council might want to take it up directly, that's where you should do it.
Okay, fine. Then we'll return to it then. Thank you. All right, so item 7, council communications and announcements. Who has something they'd like to share? Laura.
Thank you, Chair Olbert. I just wanted to report out at a recent CCAG meeting, which is the County Cities Area Government. There's been a creation of the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District. And our representative that will represent San Carlos, in addition to the rest of what's called the Central District, which includes Hillsborough, San Mateo, Foster City, and Belmont, is Mayor Diane Pappen from San Mateo. So if anybody has any questions and concerns about flood and sea level rise, Diane Pappen from San Mateo County is our representative.
Thank you, Laura. Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to report that a couple weeks ago, I stood in as the alternate for Peninsula Clean Energy, and I wanted to just let you know that there's an interesting program in the works. It's a partnership between Peninsula Clean Energy and the San Mateo County Office of Education, and they're partnering with our San Carlos School District to create a pilot online campus dashboard system that students, teachers, and administrators can use to understand the environmental impacts of schools. So, for example, instead of having students go home and collect their PG&E bill, which might be difficult for certain students, this will be set up on the computers, and each teacher will have access to incorporate data from, for example, the solar panels that are being used at the school, and to incorporate that into lessons. So, wanted to share that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Ron.
Thank you, Chair Olbert. Just a couple things. I sit on it's called the Local Policymakers Group, and what it is that it's a body of representatives from the cities from San Francisco to San Jose, and we get a monthly update on the progress of the Caltrain electrification project. Just want to report that it is proceeding. There have been a lot of foundations that are being poured, and you may see them if you take the train. Everything is, no pun intended, on track to be finished in about 3 years, and so we should see electric trains by August of 2022. It's very complex progress. We saw a business plan presentation last week, which was incredibly detailed, and Caltrain really is looking into the future. The other thing I wanted to mention is that all of us went to a Council of Cities dinner at the end of June. I wouldn't normally report on this, but we were the host, and I thought that Adam, I apologize, what's Adam's last name? Aronson made a great presentation on our progress on affordable housing to the group, and apparently he was not the first choice to do it. Other people had things that they had to attend to, and so Adam substituted and did just a magnificent job. And I was wondering whether or not the other members of various councils up and down the peninsula would be bored with it, because they're all dealing with the same issues. But a lot of them came up to me afterwards and said that they were very impressed, that they were glad to see that we're doing what we're doing, and that some of them feel like they need to play catch up. So it was really gratifying to have a great attendance, by the way. It was full house, full room, and have a great presentation from our staff. So thank you all.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I too thought Adam did a great job, and not to take anything away from him, it was also a significant team effort from Al and Martin and a number of other people as well. And I appreciate Crystal and Tara arranging the logistical side of things, because none of this stuff works at all, no matter how good the presentation is, if the logistics don't work out. I do have to say, and Jeff, maybe this is a piece of warning for you. Adam was seated at my table, as was the city manager from another city whose name will not be mentioned. And I noticed that the city manager was, this other city manager, impressing a business card on him. And so I went over afterwards and told him that he was not under any circumstances to use my meeting as a way of stealing staff. So. No, actually, they were looking to exchange, as Ron said, the expertise that our staff has developed. They want to learn from it, which is great. I just had one thing I wanted to mention, which is looking back just a few days. I hope everybody had a great July 4th holiday and was uninjured as a result of it. You know, July 4th is a very important date in U.S. history, and it's associated with a lot of conflict, because that's what gave rise to the birth of the nation. And I just wanted to report on or relay something I saw that a relative of mine, who is a U.S. Navy veteran, had posted online, which really moved me, which was very simple. It was a billboard that somebody had put up, a hand-lettered billboard, and it said, if you want to thank a soldier, be the kind of American worth fighting for. And I just thought that was really important, and I wanted to share that with people, that's how you thank them, in part. In addition to doing a great job of taking care of them after they fight for us, of course. So with that, anything else from the dais, or we'll move on? Okay. Next item is consent calendar. Consent calendar items normally approved en masse without discussion, although council members can ask to have an individual item removed and dealt with separately. Are there any items people would like to remove?
Chair, I'd like to remove item 8H, so I can recuse myself from that one because I live within 500 feet of Burton Park, and city attorney has recommended that that's the approach I take.
Well, you could move.
Or I could move. I think since I just remodeled, I'll stay where I am.
You're right. I don't want your wife to shoot me. Okay. We will remove and deal with item 8H separately. Anything else? If not, I would see if there's entertain a motion to approve the remaining items.
I move to approve City Council and San Carlos successor agency of the former redevelopment agency consent calendars, items A through G and I through N.
Second.
Do I need to do the ordinance too, sir?
Yes.
And item O, adopting ordinance number 1549, ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, approving the San Carlos Apartments Plan Development Plan and related zoning map amendment to rezone the project site from mixed-use downtown core to planned development at 817 Walnut Street, APN 050-163-190.
Second.
Crystal pointed out something to me. If the mover and seconder would be willing to do this, I would like to actually also ask that we remove and deal with separately item 8L. Is that acceptable to the Adam and to Laura?
Yeah.
There's just a request for public comment, and I'd like to. I think that'd be the simplest way of dealing with it. All right. So the motion is as amended to remove L. Okay. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Opert?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
All right. Let's take the two items right now. Adam, would you like to depart?
Sure.
There's probably a technically correct way of saying that, but depart works. Step outside. There you go. All right. Item 8H is adopt a resolution awarding a construction contract for the upgrade of existing sports field lighting at Burton and Highlands Park, project C1809, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for public projects with Capital Valley Electric, Inc. of Sacramento in the amount of $1,796,004 and authorizing the expenditure of contingency in the amount of $296,400. Is there a motion and a second, or anybody want to ask questions or discuss, or is there a staff presentation? I presume not. Okay.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Any further discussion or comment? Is there anybody from the public who wishes to address the council on item 8H? Seeing none, Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
And Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we get Adam to come back in? Thank you, Brian. All right, item 8L is adopt a resolution authorizing the application and receipt of funds for the Senate Bill SB 2, the Building Jobs and Homes Act Planning Grants Program from the State of California Housing and Community Development Department to implement the City Council 2019 Strategic Plan Goal for Housing, specifically related to general plan and zoning evaluation. There is a member of the public who wished to comment on this, so if it's okay with my colleagues, I'll have him come up and speak first. Okay. David, you're up.
I feel really guilty to have it pulled from the consent calendar just for me to comment by saying that I appreciate seeing this on the calendar. Ron and Laura have talked so much about working the Home for All initiative and all of the resources and programs and funds available from the county and the state towards our housing strategy, and I'm just so grateful to see that you're talking about it and potentially moving ahead with applying for some grants. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Jeff, I presume there's no staff presentation on this, correct? Any questions from the dais, or if not, if somebody would like to make a motion? Or not?
Can we say so moved?
Greg, that's a Greg question.
You could move item 8L.
I'll move approval of item 8L.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Crystal, hearing the call for none, Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
And Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move on to item 9, which is consideration of introducing an ordinance to amend Municipal Code Chapter 18.16, Affordable Housing Program, to require rental residential multifamily builders to build below market rate units, eliminate the below market rate in lieu fee alternative, and make other conforming amendments. Good evening, Al.
Good evening, Honorable Chair, members of the City Council. Before I begin the presentation this evening, I'd like to make a couple of introductions. We'll have Martin Romer, our Housing and Economic Development Manager, take over the presentation in just a moment. And we also have Eric Phillips, who is our Special Legal Counsel, and he's going to briefly touch upon the legal landscape. So with that, tonight, what we have before you is limited to just 2 items in our BMR ordinance, and one is requiring multifamily residential developers to build the units as opposed to being able to pay a fee, and eliminating BMR in lieu fees as a method of compliance. So what we've found over the last few years is that developers would prefer to pay a fee as opposed to building the units in our community, and it is challenging. We understand that. However, that is the real deep need in our community, to build these affordable housing units at different levels of affordability. And I'd also like to mention that we will be undertaking a comprehensive BMR ordinance update, and that will be beginning this summer. And one of the first steps in starting this process is to look at the economics of some of the things that we've been talking about. We've had some discussions over the last month or so about reducing parking requirements, minimum density standards, and things like that. And we need to have a reality check to see if some of those things really are feasible from an economic standpoint. We'll be bringing more information forward to you and the Planning Commission in the coming months, and we think we'll have something to talk about by winter of this coming winter. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Martin. And again, Eric is going to talk about the legal landscape just a little bit that has allowed us to make this change to our ordinance this evening. Martin?
Good evening, Chair Olbert and members of the City Council.
Good evening, Martin.
So our BMR ordinance currently bifurcates our compliance requirements by ownership, condo developments, and rental apartment developments. Our ownership projects of 7 units or more are required to provide 15% BMR units, 10% as moderate income units, and 5% as low income units. Or the developer may propose an alternative, and we'll discuss those a bit later on in this presentation. Developments of 6 units or less do get to pay an in lieu fee in ownership projects. However, due to a series of lawsuits, which we'll discuss a little bit later, our code currently states that rental development projects must pay an affordable housing in lieu fee. However, the developer may choose to build 15% BMR units, and the code sets that alternative as 10% very low income units and 5% low income units. So the proposed amendment before you this evening would replace the primary compliance method for rental developments from an in lieu fee and require developers of rental to build the BMR units. Specifically, rental developers of projects with 7 or more units would be required to build 15% of the units, with 10% at very low income and 5% at low income. Smaller projects, however, those less than 7 units, would still be able to pay the in lieu fee, similar to the way that our condo requirements are set up. Several San Mateo County cities have adopted similar amendments to their BMR ordinances, and these include Redwood City, which currently has a 20% BMR requirement, but at a higher trigger amount. That is the number of units in the project at which these requirements come into play. They currently have a 20 unit or more requirement. The city of San Mateo has a 15% BMR requirement for projects that, with a lower project size trigger, that is 5 units compared to our 7. The city of South San Francisco similarly has a 15% requirement for projects at even lower trigger, 4 units. And the city of Pacifica has a 15% trigger at 8 units or more. We have contacted the City of San Mateo and South San Francisco staff, and they have indicated that since the adoption of this amendment within the last year, they have not seen a slowing of development for these types of projects in their cities. A second proposed amendment to the BMR ordinance is the removal of the affordable housing in lieu fee as a compliance method for projects of 7 units or more. This would require the developers to build units on site or seek approval of an alternative, which would include potentially increasing the total number of BMR unit bedrooms, the bedroom count in a unit, for providing, even if they provide fewer units. Another alternative could be the provision of deeper levels of affordability than is otherwise required, i.e. opting to provide very low income or extremely low income units where low income units may be required. Another alternative which exists is the off-site construction of BMR units, so the developer can build the units in a different location within the city. That may be something that the BMR plan may suggest. And then finally, the ability to build rental units within an otherwise ownership project. Any requested alternative by a developer would require the approval of a BMR plan by the first approval body, either the Planning Commission or the City Council. And with that, I'll hand it over to our special counsel, Eric Phillips, who will speak to the case law that has brought us to this set of recommended policy changes. Thank you, Martin, and thank you all for having me this evening. Again, my name is Eric Phillips. I'm Special Land Use Counsel and Housing Counsel to the city, and I worked with staff on the amendments. I just wanted to highlight a couple of key developments at the state level that's allowed us to bring these amendments forward. So the city's current ordinance does not require rental properties to provide on-site affordable units by default, and that was because of a 2009 court case. It was called the Palmer decision, which said that the state Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins Act preempted local jurisdictions' abilities to enforce inclusionary against rental housing. The state legislature overturned the Palmer decision in 2017 as part of their housing package and adopted AB 1505. And what that law does is it restores your ability to adopt inclusionary housing requirements applied to rental developments so they can be required to have on-site affordable units, which is exactly what you're doing, with a couple of key caveats that if you require more than 15% affordability, HCD can intervene and ask for an economic feasibility study to demonstrate that the affordability requirements aren't unduly burdening the development of housing at all income levels. The other requirement is that you continue to offer alternative means of satisfying the affordable housing requirements that are included. And as Martin just described, your ordinance still has ample alternatives, even with the removal of the in lieu fee by right option to comply with AB 1505. The other important development was a California Supreme Court case, the CBIA, the Building Industry Association versus San Jose. They challenged the city's inclusionary fees and on-site production requirements, saying that a nexus study was required. The Supreme Court rejected that argument. They said that you as a city have, as part of your police power to protect the general welfare of your citizens, can require affordable housing as a price control, just like you could have rent control. And those price controls are constitutional, don't require a nexus study as long as they're not so high as to be confiscatory, so that they don't take value and wipe out the economic underlying economic value of the property. And again, your 15% requirement falls within the safe harbor that the statute has identified. So complying with that BIA case doesn't seem like an issue here either. So we're two very targeted amendments right now before you to address these changes at the state level, though as both Al and Martin described as next steps to prepare that economic development study and feasibility study to see what other policy changes might be possible while complying with 1505 will be the next step to identify what policy recommendations might still be before you later this year or early next year.
Thank you, Eric.
So in terms of next steps, we're currently here at the first bullet with the reading of the ordinance amendment. A second reading, if this were to advance, would occur at the August 26th meeting, and the new requirements would then go into effect 30 days after the adoption. We do want to note that the Planning Commission did take an action at its July 1st meeting. The Planning Commission adopted a resolution recommending that the City Council introduce this ordinance to amend Municipal Code Chapter 1816, Affordable Housing Programs. And with that, we'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Martin. Before we do questions, we do have one public speaker who wanted to address us on this, and as we've been experimenting with, we're going to have the public speaking questions and comments done first before ours. David Pollack, you're up again. Maybe you should just stay up there.
Stay up there. If I had 3 minutes to begin with. Back and forth.
Well, I haven't told you yet. You haven't used more than 2 minutes on the other ones.
So I get to yield the time for the next? Great. Well, I just want to, again, thank the council for following through with this initiative to change the ordinance. Especially, I recall when Sarah first suggested it at a council meeting, and it was quickly seconded or supported by the rest of the council, and to see the follow through with staff is really great. But this is sort of one small step in a larger initiative that I would like to see the council make greater strides towards. So I just leave you with by saying I just urge the council to be more directive with staff in terms of a strategic or a strategy around affordable housing, and as the previous item in the implementation of the City Council 2019 strategic goal for housing, specifically related to general plan and zoning evaluation. Any plan and strategy can't come fast enough for many members of our community. Thank you.
Pardon me. Thank you, David. Is there anybody? Oh, yes, we do have one other speaker card. Brian Perkins. Good evening, Brian.
Good evening, Council. I was just listening to the summary of it and just confirming it with the attorney, I guess. So what this proposal does allow people to do is to build an apartment building, 15% affordable units, and then we think that they're going to maybe put the affordable units someplace else geographically, but in fact it appears that they could actually buy condos and then tag those as being affordable, rent them as an affordable rate. And the problem that I have with that is A, it doesn't increase the total housing stock, and B, it's hard to supervise. And it's hard to supervise. I've seen it in other cities where they have deed-restricted properties, and there's always a question about, well, what happens when someone cheats and goes out on Airbnb, and does the city even notice it? And so I would caution the council about that particular characteristic of the ordinance. The rest of it sounds terrific, but you might want to just say that they're either building it off-site or they're building it on-site and just leave it at that, because I think you got a real supervision problem if you can allow them to engage in real estate speculation, frankly. It doesn't do anything to their balance sheet except make it better if they invest in San Carlos real estate. We know that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the council on this topic? Seeing none, are there questions of staff from the dais?
Mr. Chair, do you not need a motion to close the public hearing?
Oh, you know what, Ron? That'd probably be a good idea. Would you like to make one?
I move we close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Ron, I want you to know I almost voted no just because you showed me up again.
Trying to keep you honest.
There you go. Doing a great job at it, too. All right, so let's see. Ron, it looks like you also had some questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually just had one so far. I had a lot of questions, but after speaking with our city manager today, I realized this is just like step one of a pretty long process. But I believe my question is for Eric. You mentioned that because of the Palmer decision, I think the words you used were the legislature overturned the Palmer decision, and I'm not quite clear how that works. I thought courts could only overturn decisions. So did the legislature basically create new law that complied with what Palmer was based on? Maybe you could just clear up my confusion.
Sure. So yeah, I was not as precise with my description as I could have been there. But so what the Palmer decision was based on an interpretation of the government code and California statute. So the legislature added new provisions to the government code to specifically create or recreate this power for local governments, which in effect undid the Palmer decision. It resolved the apparent inconsistency that the Palmer decision found between the Costa-Hawkins Act and the Ellis Act and cities restricting the rents of affordable housing in conjunction with the construction of new development. But the legislature essentially created a new exception to that legislative regime that gave you that authority to do so.
All right. Thank you.
Adam.
Thank you. I had a couple questions, and some of them I know it was mentioned, so I'm just going to want to make sure I understand this. So some of the other pieces that we talked about for this, with in terms of BMR, so for units that are developers building less than 7 units, those sorts of things are things we'll look at coming back later. They don't need to be a part of this ordinance at this time.
That's correct. If the council wanted to change the numbers, change the threshold, you could do it when we bring back the comprehensive update to the BMR ordinance, yes.
That would include sort of just requiring certain minimums too, if we wanted to.
Correct.
And in terms of with this, since we're changing the, putting a requirement in potentially to require units, you will get to a point where there's percentages of units, right? So we would still take a fee for that if the 15% was, 2.5 units. And then this doesn't affect the current fee structure for those units. That's something we can look at separately to say, do a study to say, what are we at market rate for those percentages, those fees that we would collect regardless of where we are right now?
Yes.
Okay. And then I had one other question, and then assuming someone's going to bring up what Mr. Perkins brought up, but if not, I will bring that question up after. But on the type of housing that we chose for the BMR, how did you guys get to that? Because I saw some of the different cities had different levels. Some had low, very low. Some had moderate, low. How did you get to that breakout of the 15%?
We did a nexus study. So essentially, we did a study of the marketplace and presented some options at that time to the Planning Commission and City Council. And the decisions were made back when that BMR ordinance was adopted. But I'm going to let Martin fill in any gaps.
Yeah, I think Al explained it well. That was the division of the in lieu fee that was addressed at that time, where for condominiums it was split up between moderate and low income units, and then it was conceived that in order to serve some of the deeper levels of affordability, it would be optimal to set it up for the very low to be more rental stock. But speaking to the desire to set up this economic land use study to determine what levels of affordability and what percentage might be optimal, and also what division might be optimal, we will work with our consultants to figure out what might be best given current market conditions, and also reviewing the statistics of our BMR housing wait list to figure out how we can best serve those that are looking for housing in our city.
So does that mean once you do the study, we have to go back and do this ordinance again at this point? If you're going to change that, if you determine that you have to change the percentages or change the...
That would be an option that is available to the council to change, to increase or decrease the percentage amount. As I mentioned, Redwood City.
Level of affordability.
Or the level of affordability. Or the applicability of the categories. So currently, neither rental or condominiums would be addressing the extremely low income category. Some cities may up to 5% or maybe 2% of some distribution. There's a lot of permutations how it can be cut, but underlying this whole policy decision should be an economic land use study that would ensure that a developer still has access to some sort of profit to make sure that the project can continue.
And so what was the thought process then behind sort of moving this forward out, doing that land use study first to determine sort of the best leveling of affordability?
I think that's a question for me. All right. Based on prior council discussions at some of the various retreats we've had, it was clear that the council, and I think the council actually specifically said that they were comfortable bringing forward pieces of this if it meant moving elements quicker. And so that's how we've looked at it. This was ready to go, so rather than wait for a more comprehensive package to come forward with all of it included, we brought this forward independent, knowing that we'd be coming back and looking at this ordinance again in the near future.
So I get, and I appreciate that. And I know we've talked about trying to move things forward. I guess the question was why. But you're talking about when we bring other things, we're going to keep amending this particular ordinance, or this with new things that come in, or would potentially have to redo the ordinance if we change the levels of affordability, and that would be sort of because the other BMR ordinances. I mean, are we touching different parts of it? Does it make sense? I'm just asking if it makes sense to do it now. We're now going to be sort of redoing the same thing over and over again, adding extra staff work when maybe we could have done it beforehand. support what we're trying to do. I just want to get some
This
clarification.
particular language is unlikely to be changed by the other changes, so I think we'll be done with this unless the landscape externally changes in this area. So I think we'll be good here. This isn't a wasted effort. It's a slightly increased effort in terms of this one agenda item, but the work that's gone into it would have been the same either way. I think the outcome in the long run will be the same as what potentially is approved tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation, too. I appreciate all the time that went into this, and I'm excited to be working on this evening. My question is, I've heard some concern in the community that by doing away with in-lieu fees, that will have a negative impact on our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit tonight to the cut that we're, the slice that we're going to be losing, but also the future of our commercial linkage fee and how the fees that will be generated by that in the future.
So the fees from for our Affordable Housing Fund come from two types of development, right? Residential development that pays that fee, and the residential developers that pay their contribution to the fund are those who aren't building the units. And so most certainly those who write the check for that fee portion are paying a much lower amount than they would be paying if they were to actually build the units. So for the residential development side of things, it's really kind of advantageous to get the actual units built versus collecting the funds and then actually gathering sufficient funds to build a project. And then a very significant portion of where we will be receiving funds for this particular fund will be from commercial development, and this action will not impact how we collect fees from commercial development for the housing fund.
So would you say going forward 90% of the fees will be coming from the commercial linkage fee? That will be our main source of revenue for the trust fund, and yes. Will that be in the millions of dollars in the near future?
Order of magnitude for the commercial linkages will be in the millions for our large East Side development projects, whereas those projects that are 6 units or below in the hundreds of thousands magnitude.
And then Martin, I had one other question. Do you have any inkling on how many more units we will be able to capture, how many more affordable units we'll be able to capture with having done away with the in lieu fee, the option to write the check?
It's difficult to estimate that because it'll really be based on what kind of development activity we see, and it's just the macroeconomic factors that lead with development cycles. But from what we've learned from our peer cities, the establishment of this program requiring rental developers to build the units has not deterred development. So, we're kind of seeing between 10 to 50 units being built in these last kind of hot development cycle years, and I anticipate that this should continue for the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Laura.
Thank you, Chair. So I think this might be for Al, I'm not sure, but I just want to open by saying I think this is a small but a very important step towards closing the job housing gap. I know we've come a distance in the last 4 years from 24-1 to now 12-1 according to San Mateo County. And we still have many units to build at the lower levels. What I'm still struggling with a little bit around this, and I think it might get at what, to Brian Perkins' point that he suggested, which is what we really need are the units. And what I heard you say a few meetings ago, I think it was in the first quarter, is that many developers are stopping at going from up to that 7th unit. And that 7th unit at 15%, will equate to 1 full unit. So any property that has 6 or fewer units effectively is a fraction of a unit in terms of a new affordable home. So how will this impact the motivation for developers to get out of that comfort zone of below 7 units per project? Does that make sense?
Quite frankly, I'm not sure that it will. I don't think that will have any impact on those folks. They're on small, it typically happens on smaller properties where you're on the cusp. Like you could get 8 units But instead, if you build 6, 2,500 square foot homes, well, your profit margins are about the same as if you built 8. So that's where those choices get made. So like you said, those are maybe 1, 2, 3 units in the community for a number of different projects. Where this will make a really big impact is on a little bit larger piece of land, half an acre, where you do have 10, 20, 50 units, and then you're talking about real production. And those have been the most difficult conversations with developers at 13, 18 units, 30 units. That's where these margins really get into their balance sheet, and so those have been the most difficult conversations. And to have this in place, that's no longer part of the mix. It's, hey, you need to build the units, and we can talk about how to get that done, but those units will get built now, and as opposed to a big, long, drawn-out discussion. And it's not great for them either, quite frankly, to drag it out with all these discussions.
So what I'm hearing you say is that at the kind of a medium-sized project, but well above the 7 units is where this will have an impact.
Yes.
So for the smaller projects, and it does seem that we do get a fair number of those, is there an opportunity, for example, for the city to kind of work with these developers? So for example, if we were to find funding, for example, from an organization like HEART or something similar that we did, for example, with the recent Walnut Street project, to partner with some of these developers to get some of these units built, if we could find a source of funding. Is that possible?
Yes, that is possible, and it's something we can explore as part of our BMR update. And I think just to take it a step further, and something a little more significant would be to lower that threshold below 7.
Lower the threshold below, you mean in terms of making sure the units get built? If it's a fewer number, the project has fewer units, require a unit to get built. Like if it was a 5-unit building, ask that one of those units gets set aside.
That kind of thing,
Got it,
yes.
okay. All right, thank you.
So I think most of my questions are Al questions, but you can hand them off to whoever you like. Let me start with an easy one, sort of a Bob Grisilli one. HCD, what's the acronym stand for?
Housing and Community Development, the State Housing and Community Development Department.
Okay. And my understanding from the comments Eric made, or the explanation Eric made, so that they have authority under the law if we were to impose something that was considered onerous or excessively onerous, that they could come in and demand a study be made to justify it. Yes. Have they ever intervened like that? Or is this legislation too new and there's no way to tell? Maybe it's an Eric question.
So this is a pretty new provision. I'm not aware of HCD specifically stepping in on inclusionary housing, but along with these changes, they were specifically authorized to refer a broad class of housing element violations and other housing law actions to the Attorney General. They have stepped up their enforcement on that front. There's one lawsuit where the state is suing a jurisdiction in Southern California. They also have sent out a number of enforcement letters trying to encourage cities to amend their ordinances before that sort of enforcement action is required. They're also ramping up their staffing to do monitoring and enforcement. So I would expect that their oversight and intervention will only increase in the coming years. This has been a priority issue of the state, and they are funding and staffing to commensurate to that.
Okay, thank you. Actually, and I appreciate the sideband information there, because it kind of dovetails nicely into my next question / observation. It really seems to me like it'd be pretty unlikely if hypothetically we were to go with a more aggressive stance, and let's say instead of 15%, we said 20%, which would also allow us to get down to 5 units, right, as a threshold. It doesn't sound like HCD is likely to show up at our door to complain, because every one of the examples Eric just cited are actually on the other side of the table. They're pushing communities who are not doing enough. okay, and holding feet to the fire, whereas if we could legitimately say, hey, we're in the middle of one of the worst housing jobs mismatch area in the state, and yes, we went a little bit further than what the letter of the law said, but it said we could do that. To me, that sounds like a fairly easy bet to make, which now leads into my next question, which is, would we tonight be able to, for example, amend that number so that instead of 15%, we said it's 20% and it's down to 5 units as opposed to having a minimum of 7 units?
I don't believe so, but that is something that we should check in with our legal counsel on, because it's not on the agenda and we didn't come up with an ordinance for that. But Greg, did you get
well,
that
that's
question?
one of the issues, but I think the special counsel can talk about the overall regulatory aspects of how this works.
Sure. So to go up to 20% from 15%, there's not a nexus study requirement, and you're right that it would, on its face, appear that you're trying to encourage more affordable housing. That's certainly an admirable goal. The risk that you would run is if there was a developer or the BIA that brought it to HCD's attention and viewed it as a constraint on development.
BIA, sorry.
Sorry, the Building Industry Association. They are very active in monitoring these requirements and often will report increased fees to HCD and ask HCD to send a letter to intervene. That's not to say that that definitely would happen here. And the risk that the city would face is if HCD were to ask for an economic feasibility study, you could prepare one to demonstrate that 20% were feasible and that it did not unduly constrain market rate development. If you could not prepare one or demonstrate that that was true, you would be limited to a 15% requirement, notwithstanding the language of your ordinance.
So let me echo that back and make sure I understand that. I want to talk to Greg a little bit here. That what that sounds like it boils down to is, other than the study costs, and I'll call them transactional costs of doing something, if we were to adopt a more aggressive stance, there is a risk that we might be held accountable for being too aggressive if we couldn't demonstrate that there was a basis for it, a reasonable basis for it. We'd be forced to default back to what we're talking about doing tonight anyway.
That's correct.
Okay, other than the transaction costs, the observation to me is that sounds like a costless option. Greg, the question I guess I have is, I thought that in one sense all I was potentially proposing about doing was tweaking some of the numbers in the ordinance that's before us tonight. And then when Al said that he wasn't sure we could do that tonight, that sounds like a Greg question.
Well, I think the issue that Al brought up is that the staff report and the noticing for this item doesn't talk about changing that aspect of the ordinance. It talks about just changing the requirement for rental units. So there's one issue there that we have not the agenda noticing in this item does not cover that potential change. And then I think what Al's also, and I don't want me to speak for him, but the comprehensive review that we would bring forward, that could be something on the menu that you would be looking at is the 15% an appropriate number now in this day and age, or should it be a bit larger number? Should it be the 20%? Should we change the thresholds of the effectiveness of the number? Now, I think having said that, the report does talk about the limiting the fee to below the 7 units. So it might be a little easier, since we're changing that part of it, to address that number, because that's definitely part of the staff report. That's where the in lieu fee starts to apply. But I'll leave it to staff to see how that integrates with what the overall program is.
Before we hear a little bit more from Al or whoever else on that, I think I understand what you're saying, but frankly, I have memories of the council amending ordinances more or less along the lines of what I was potentially talking about introducing in the past, and we haven't not done that. I mean, it's almost like I feel like we ought to make it a standard protocol that says whenever we put something before the council that's got numbers in it is, by the way, numbers are subject to amendment. And you know, I guess I always assumed that as long as they were not totally unreasonable or unreasonable on their face, I guess I assumed that was implicit.
Yeah, I'm looking at, Mr. Chair, I'm just looking right at the agenda item title, and that's what's causing me some pause on those types of changes, because it just talks about amending the code, the specific chapter, to require residential multifamily builders to build the below market rate units and eliminate the BMR in lieu fee alternative and make other conforming amendments. So I'm looking, I'm not trying to limit what the council wants to consider. I'm just saying that when I look at that agenda item, I'm wondering if the other interested parties, since this is a zoning ordinance change, have been put on notice of some of those.
You know, I see what you're saying, and I tell you what, I'll come back to that come back to this in a different format or a different way. Al, I had another question as well. So something clicked for me tonight when staff was walking through here, is that, you know, like many communities, we have a perennial problem with the units that mostly get built are on the upper end of the income scale. And what suddenly occurred to me is that, like, that's sort of obvious that ought to be what would happen, because if you're a developer and you're like, well, I can either build a unit that I'm going to lose X dollars on, or I'm going to lose 2X dollars on, well, guess what you build? You build the one that you only lose X dollars on. So what I'm leading up to is, do we have the statutory authority, and there'll be a separate Greg question about whether we could include it in tonight's discussion, this may be a future thing as well, to basically say, no, we have a profile of BMR units across income spectrums that we would like built. I'm making these numbers up, and 20% of them are on the low end. And if you have 5 BMR units that are going to be built in your project, one of those has to be on the low end. In other words, it has to match the distribution. It's not just your choice. Do we have the authority to do that? And separately, is that something we could do tonight, or is that, again, bring that back in the future?
Yes, I believe it is something that you could do. And I don't know if you could do that tonight, again, going back to Greg's point about what's on the agenda. But yes, I believe that you can do that.
I won't make Greg go through the whole thing again. So, but I appreciate it. So we do have the flexibility at some point to do something like that. Okay. So we have to discuss as a council whether we want to do that. I don't mean to occupy the air here. One last question. Brian Perkins brought up, I thought, a really good point, which is, hey, let's be careful, I'm paraphrasing, let's be careful we don't disincentivize people from building quantity. The goal is to expand the housing stock, not just to have more BMR units. Are there other elements of what's on here tonight that we ought to ask staff to come back and tweak to make sure that we're not doing that?
I think that when we go through it, we will, look at a whole bunch of different things, and so we'll come back with many ideas for you at that time. For me to kind of go through what we think at this point, not so sure. If you want to get into that kind of a discussion, perhaps, but there's a myriad of things that we could look at, and cities do it in different ways. And so it's kind of tough for me to zero in on one particular thing.
Fair enough. Given that I know you were listening when Brian raised his point, did language occur to you of what we could change tonight to deal with that? Because he mentioned a very specific issue.
Yes, and I guess let's talk about that for a moment. So the issue is that, as our legal counsel noted, that there needs to be something in the ordinance that allows some flexibility to the provision of those units. Not they can't pay the fee anymore, but if you're going to provide them, our ordinance currently says that they could take market rate units and turn them into affordable units. Mr. Perkins, I think what he was saying is that, well, that doesn't increase the overall supply. It just takes market rate, and it also it just turns those into BMR. And two, it would be very challenging perhaps to monitor those units to make sure the deed restriction is being adhered to. So those are, I think that's true. On the other hand, you're getting below market rate units at levels of affordability that the city wants. So I think those points are valid, but it's also valid to say that you're getting units that didn't exist before at affordable levels, which is very challenging to do anyway. So it's kind of one of those, it's one of those things where you have the scale on both ends. Not sure if there's an easy answer, but I think that that could be removed, that one provision could be removed from this ordinance, and even perhaps this evening, because you're talking about how developers will be able to provide for those units elsewhere instead of paying the fee. So I think that that may be a provision that our legal counsel or your legal counsel might allow you to strike if you wanted to.
Mr. Legal Counsel?
Well, my one caveat is we want to. We have a special legal counsel there on that, so I'll let him speak first, and I'll put in my comments.
I was just going to follow with so I'll hold until after you finish your thought.
Okay. Well, my thought was that that issue. This is probably not necessarily a legal opinion, but I just that issue has been raised tonight, but I don't know if it's been studied to how it impacts the overall comprehensive. I'm just raising that as an issue for you to consider. But I think I agree with Al. That's more in tune with how we are dealing with rental units. And that seems to be much closer to what our agenda item has, because it's talking about requiring residential multifamily builders to build below market rate units. And that's a lot more like what I think is being proposed by that, as opposed to the other changing the percentages.
Okay, thank you. Ron.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to summarize, if we could. Basically, this amendment, or this ordinance amendment tonight, ordinance change, is intentionally overly broad, correct?
Yeah, or yes.
And it doesn't restrict us from making a lot of changes later or adding things to future ordinances or guidelines that whatever we want to establish.
Not restrict you in any way.
Right. That was my impression. And with regard to, limiting the size of projects and that sort of thing, it's up to us anyway, right? To allow more units if we want. I'm just wondering, is that something we really need? And I don't know if this is for you or for staff in general, but is it something that we really need to codify? And that if we have the ultimate authority to allow more units, we can allow more units, right? As long as it's within our guidelines.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
May I make one clarification to this one point that we were just discussing? The one provision that we failed to mention is that the ordinance, if you do build it off-site, my understanding is they have to build 10% more in a condo development. Like if they bought market rate units and turned them into affordable, they would have to do 10% more. Is that correct? Okay, that's something that is a fairly significant difference.
And that's, by the way, just to be clear, that's 10% of the number of units. So if they had to build 5 BMR units and they built them all off-site, they'd have to build 6.
That's correct.
Or, no, I did the math wrong, but 5.5. But if there were 10, there'd be 11.
Rounded up to 6.
Okay.
And just to highlight that, that applies to off-site construction and if you were to be converting units. So I think I just wanted to clarify that the overall net amount of units that are being produced is not reduced if you allow for off-site conversion. If there's a new project that's building 100 units, if it's providing units on site, 15%, 15 of those units are affordable, you still have 100 net new units. If you allow that to go off-site, even if it's converting, you still get those 100 net new units, and it would then purchase at a market rate other units that could be converted and deed restricted, so that you could have the enforcement ability to monitor and make sure that it was being sold or rented at an affordable price. And as Al just mentioned, you would actually get more units, 10% more affordable units under that scenario. So although the oversight, the monitoring, and the enforcement continues to be a challenge, I certainly acknowledge that. I don't think that allowing the conversion reduces the overall net amount of housing that the city would be getting.
Not sure I agree with the math, but anyway, Adam.
Thank you, Chair Olbert. One question and one just comment on one of your previous comments about and I think we were talking about the same thing, about the percentage of where the housing, affordable units would go. Mm-hmm. Right, and I think we talked about that, something we can look at later on. So I agree that it's something that from the study that we would find out. So I think that's what you were talking about as well. Okay, and then so we've got a couple questions just around what Mr. Perkins has said and some of the things you mentioned around this. So could we could, as my understanding, you could just strike off-site construction if you wanted to in here, and potentially have enough options that would be valid to meet the ordinance if we felt like that was an option. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you could, and I think that was borne out. But just from a staff perspective, we prefer to provide you with analysis. That's just our, provide you with some things that studies and economic feasibility analysis prior to doing that, but it is within your purview.
Okay. And then is it possible to, in that piece that talks about developers may still propose, can we add something that says, provided that any of these alternatives increase the overall number of overall housing units in the city, or bedrooms, if it was to cover the bedroom piece?
So I do just want to highlight that any BMR plan that is proposed has to be approved. So if they want to trigger any of these alternatives, if this goes forward tonight, then they are required to build these units on site. And any deviation from there will require approval of a BMR plan. And whether it comes to the Planning Commission or before this body, that body will have to make the findings that are articulated in this code. And the findings are that the proposed alternative meets the greatest community need at the time that the alternative is reviewed. So if it was found that nothing will meet the greatest community need, then to maximizing the number of BMR units, inherently, I think the body would be able to make that determination without even amending this language as it's written now.
And could we make the determination potentially that maximizing the number of housing units would require that, would make that the off-site construction not a reasonable alternative?
I believe we could strike it on.
I'm just saying if we left it here as an option, but when Planning Commission, or if it came here as making that determination, could we say, could potentially from a study say, actually just shifting the BMR units around to different places does not meet the greatest community need, that the greatest community need is met by increasing the overall housing stock? And that is the only way to do that.
That may be what the finding, that may be what the rationale behind the findings is.
Could potentially, and that would potentially eliminate the off-site construction, or they'd have to build those units somewhere else, and they'd have to actually physically build more units to do it versus just converting market rate units. Okay. Thank you.
Laura.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So just a couple things. So my understanding was that, and I may not be following, tracking this conversation, but my understanding was building units off-site was also an option to target the BMR. And you're nodding yes. Okay. So when I look at what our strategic goal is, and we kind of reapproved our strategic plan this evening, the consent calendar with some updates from staff, we say increase the number of below market rate housing units to meet local and regional housing requirements. So in my mind, that crosses all levels of affordability. And my preference would be that we do it in such a way so it doesn't create an burden on administrative tasks for an already very burdened staff who's very talented and working very hard, but we get those additional units built. So if there's anything in there that would prohibit us from being able to get the units built, I'm not in favor of it. So I guess that's where your analysis would have to come forward.
Are there any other questions or comments for staff? Given the complexity of what we just talked about, obviously we can certainly entertain motions, but it might be better to actually have a little discussion about what we would like to move before we do that. Any comments that people want to make? Or sort of summary comments?
I'll just...
I'm sorry, Rob.
I'm sorry.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm leaning towards wanting a little more analysis from staff about the off-site housing discussion that we're having. I absolutely see the point of, purchasing market rate units and converting them to BMR units is not creating housing stock. That's not lost on me. But I'd like to see a little more analysis before writing that in if we were to amend the ordinance tonight. I will say in general, I'm thrilled that this is coming forward. I think that as a city, we need to look at short-term options and long-term options for increasing our essential housing. And, our long-term options are using our affordable housing trust funds and purchasing properties like we did with 817 Walnut, which happened in 2002, and it took 17 years for us to see the project come through. And so I think short-term ordinance fixes like this one, where we make it very clear that we need to increase our housing stock and, do away with the in lieu fees, I think is an excellent step in the right direction, and it will ensure that the housing that is getting built right now includes the units that we need right now so that we can start addressing this challenge now. So I want to thank you again for your hard work on getting this to us tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Ron, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but Sarah had her line. So were there general comments you wanted to make?
No problem at all. I just want to make sure that if we start taking things out, we're taking something that's overly broad, which was our original intention, our original task or intention, and then making it more restrictive. And specifically with this offsite construction line that's in there. If we take that out and we remove that as an option, do we not potentially limit ourselves or limit our negotiating power downstream?
That is a possibility.
Okay. Yeah. All right, and that's one of the reasons I'm a little reluctant to remove that. I mean, we can change things down the road. We can decide that we don't like what they're proposing. But by taking it out now, do we not tie our hands? Potentially.
Yeah, and that is potentially, it lessens the number of options that the council has for negotiating in the future. It may be that makes more sense, for our particular project to do it that particular way. It doesn't have to be done that way, but it may make sense to you at some point in the future.
Right, okay. So it just seems to me that it may seem like a good idea now, but we could potentially regret it later. All right.
If, Adam, I know your light's on, but if you don't mind, we're sort of discussion. I'd like to follow up on something that Ron and Al were just talking about. And I've been noodling here with some numbers, and I think where I'm going to come out is where Sarah said she was, which is that not sure I want to pull something out of the proposed resolution for tonight, but definitely would like staffs to study it more deeply about what the impact is and stuff. But to the discussion you and Ron were having, even if we were to remove it, my understanding is that as a matter of negotiations, that doesn't necessarily mean on a given project the council couldn't say, well, yeah, we removed that, but in your case, we are going to allow you to build these units someplace else. In other words, it's all part of the negotiating process, whether it's in there or not. And really what the resolution and the ordinance language says is they sort of set the starting point for the discussions. It's almost like, the counter argument to what you and Ron were talking about, I think, is if the language is in there, then I as a developer can go, well, they're clearly willing to consider doing that because they put it in there. As opposed to if it's not there, we may or may not consider it. So.
May I comment on that, Mr. Chairman? I think that under certain circumstances that may be the case. For instance, I think if it's not in the ordinance and the council wanted to do something different than something that's written down, you would need to have a development agreement with the developer as a contract to do something different. So yes, it would be feasible to do different things with that provision. But if in the event a developer doesn't agree to a development agreement or some other contractual agreement outside your ordinance, then it may be more tricky. But of course, you have final authority.
And since we're talking about whether they build the BMR units on site or not, if they want to do the project, they have to build them on site. That's the default thing if we take the other thing out. Adam, I saw your light was on.
Sure. Thank you. And so I guess I want to get clarification from Sarah, because I'm not sure where you're ending up on this. Whether you're saying you want to move forward with this tonight, or you want to pull it back and do some more research around it.
No, I would like to vote on it as worded tonight, and then if we're going to make changes as stuff, you're doing a very large economic analysis, it sounds to me, with many different items to cover, and if the off-site construction is something that can be tackled and that is a piece of it, then I'd like to see the analysis there.
And then thank you for that clarification. And then I think for me, I think Martin's response about the sort of, we have flexibility, potentially, we have the potential to say this is not right for this project or this is with this. It just gives some overall flexibility in the negotiation process is good for me, and I think this is a good next step on getting things done. And I mean, ultimately, these options not all these options add more units. Some of them could provide just more affordability, right? So it's not like the only alternative is more units. There are other things that developers could put in place for that. So I mean, I'm inclined to just move forward with this, and we'll keep looking at other things. It's got more things coming, and I'd be inclined to move this ordinance if everyone's okay with that.
I think we're very close to that, so you'll be able to do something. But I just had a question I want to ask Greg, because some of the items that I was talking about before, where you were explaining to me why you were not comfortable with even me proposing as an amendment to the language some stuff. Am I still allowed to see if the council was willing to give staff direction to study such things, or is that not?
Oh, you could do that, yeah.
Okay, because that's not an action item. It's just saying we'd like you to look at it.
Yeah, we'd like to, for example, we'd like staff, when you come back with some more, the more comprehensive review, we'd like to have you analyze that and bring that forward to us.
Okay.
As part of that.
Then I would like to see whether my colleagues would support two items in that category. One is I would like to see staff study and bring back to us potentially language that would increase the BMR percentage beyond the 15% to go to, say, 20%. And if I'm understanding the way the math works out, lowering the threshold from 7 units down to 5, where it basically becomes a whole number. I mean, basically 15% of 7 is 1 unit. That's why I think those numbers go together. And so 20% of 5 units would be a whole unit. So I'd like to see that studied. And then the second thing I'd like to see studied and brought back to us is the item I talked to Al about, where we would explicitly tie the the portfolio of what a project builds as BMR units to what the needs are. In other words, it's if we have a bigger need currently for stuff on the low income, then that's mostly what we want built. And too bad if you want to build something else, just don't do your project here. I'm being a little overly dramatic there. I hope it's not that black and white. So I'd like to see if there's support for either or both of those ideas.
And I think I'd like to amend your suggestion for the first one, if I can, because I'm not, to understand if we can look at other options besides lowering the number of units, that maybe there may be other ways to get to the units, not instead of restricting ourselves. Can we, just put a requirement that if you have a certain amount of square footage in a unit, in a project, that would trigger it? Versus 5, because I mean, I just want that sort of just some alternatives to that. I think I like the idea of kind of getting more units built that way, but I want to give more flexibility around how that can be done.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that tweak on it, because to me the goal is to get more units built. However we do that, that's really what we're trying to do.
More flexibility around for staff to look at things.
Okay. Laura.
Yeah, so I'm open to the idea about what you're talking about, Adam, about square footage, because it sounds to me like we're getting a lot of 6-unit apartment buildings that have lots of square footage, as opposed to maybe they could have gotten 8 units out of that. In terms of studying the need for below market rate housing, I don't know that any more analysis, in my opinion, needs to be done. I mean, I think it's painfully obvious. I think we have currently 1,500 people on the wait list here in San Carlos, and 600 of those people actually live and work in our community. So I don't feel the need to continue to analyze that part of it. I want us to strive towards, at a minimum, meeting the RHNA requirements across those stated levels of affordability that we need to hit, and we already know where we are against those. There's only 44 below market rate units in the pipeline right now, and we have 344 more to go. So I don't think that needs further discussion. I think we just need to figure out how to get the units built.
I just want to, so Adam was supporting my 2 sort of directions to staff as part of the more in-depth study that they're already currently undertaking.
That's number 1, right? Your first of your 2.
Sorry. Okay.
Right.
I wasn't exactly sure, Laura, if you were making comments independent of what I was doing, which is perfectly fine, or whether you were responding to what I had said.
I was responding to Adam's build on your first idea about the 20% 5 units, where he was translating that into maybe we could look at square footage. And then I was commenting on what I thought I heard you say, and maybe I misunderstood, was wanting to understand kind of how many units at each level of affordability are needed in our community. I don't think that requires any further study.
Thank you for clarifying that. I did not mean to study that more. What I wanted to study was the notion of, I agree with you completely. We have a very good sense of where the shortfall is at the different income levels. What I wanted to do was to have staff bring back to us language where we would put the requirement on housing developers to meet that need. In other words, not just build stuff at the upper end of the level. Not to study it. In other words, I actually want to see the stuff built on the lower end.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
And you're okay with that?
I want the same.
Okay.
But can I ask about that? I thought we're already doing that study. That's part of what staff said they were going to do already as part of this ordinance in there, to look at how we wanted to, what the best makeup for rental units was in terms of moderate, low, very low, extremely low income, and to make suggestions to us about where the best place to potentially amend that is.
I was not clear. There were a number of things that I heard that were being studied. I was not clear about whether the option or the idea of, once we have established what the need is, that we actually tie the obligation to say you must match the portfolio of the need. If you're required to build 10 BMR units, some percentage of them must be very low, some percentage of them must be low, et cetera.
But aren't we saying that right now it has to be 10% very low and 5% low? That's what's in the ordinance now.
My interpretation of that was that sort of static language, as opposed to, I'd like something that says, as we periodically revisit that and because we revisit that periodically, that the obligation is always to build what we need, not just to say it has to be X percent at this level.
So I guess my concern about that is if it's a dynamic number, does that impact the ability to attract developers to come in? You know, they're saying like it's sort of too much uncertainty in San Carlos. Can we just commit to maybe looking at it once a year or something and redoing it versus? Because otherwise, it sounds like we're just constantly doing studies about what we needs are.
Well, and I don't want to do that. Okay.
Right. So.
That what you just described would be a way of implementing what I'm talking about, which is that it's regularly done and the ordinance is regularly updated or whatever. Right. I'm okay with that. I just don't want to. The notion is that I want to try and get away from this fact that, gee, it's really odd, but the only things that ever really get built are on the upper end of the income spectrum. I want to sort of say, no, every time we build BMR units, we know we need some at the lower end. And if you're building units and you have to build BMR units, you're going to have to build some stuff at the lower end. Full stop, end of story. Unless you make some other accommodations, as we've been talking about.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Ron?
Thank you, Mark. I was struggling with my concerns, and Laura then just crystallized them. So thank you, Laura. Yeah, I'm just a little confused by all this. It seems to me that what's being asked, you're already planning on doing. Am I wrong? I mean, isn't this all part of the process to come up with these options to, increase BMR units and to, to tie the BMR to whatever the, the needs are at the particular time? Is this not something we're already in progress with?
Yes, I mean, we're in process. We're beginning the process of a comprehensive review and of the ordinance, and you've talked about a number of different things you'd like us to look at this evening, and we hear that. This one, these two particular changes, though, are in the near term will have an impact, and that is because we continue to get applications for housing development. Tomorrow we'll get one the next day. And so it allows us sooner to get to getting those units built in these development projects, as opposed to, having this back and forth whether they can pay the fee or not. So this gets it faster. We get to this getting those units built faster, I think, with this particular low-hanging fruit short-term change.
If I could expand a little bit, I think this discussion that the dais has just been having is extremely valuable. I think, in short, you're all correct, and the more discussion you're having, the more we're understanding what really the priorities are. And I think what we can take away from this is there may be a number of ways and a number of options that we can provide to the City Council to both expand the housing stock in the community, but also to make sure that we're expanding it in the areas that the community needs most, where our deficiencies are the greatest. And so I think all five of you have said in very different ways that you agree with that, and so it'll now fall to us to make sure we provide not only the data, but the options for the council to consider as this process matures and goes forward.
Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
So given that, do we actually need to add these items as requirements? In other words, to give you the direction.
I'm going to interrupt, sorry, because it was not to add to the action item tonight. It was just to have the discussion and give staff the benefit of assessing what the general synthesis view of the council was, which I think I just heard Jeff say that they got a lot of useful information out of, which is fine. So I think at this point, Adam is really dying to make a motion.
I would actually like to defer to Sarah, since this was her original idea, to let her make the motion.
There we go.
Thanks, Adam.
The other end of the dais. Sarah.
I move to introduce ordinance number
1550.
1550, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending Municipal Code Chapter 18.16, affordable housing programs to require rental, residential, multifamily builders to build below market rate units, eliminate the below market rate in lieu fee alternative, and make other conforming amendments.
Second.
I'm going to ask anyway, is there any further discussion? Laura.
Yeah, I would just make sure that if this passes tonight, that we monitor the concern that was brought forward by the public to ensure that there are no people kind of creating loopholes and getting out of this and things that are far out of our control that we can't manage. So.
Can I add one? Oh. I just want to thank staff for all the work on this and appreciate it. Really nice to move this thing forward. And I would echo that and echo Laura's concern as well, and also want to thank Sarah for having been the initiator of this about a month or so ago. So thank you. With that, Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
All right. That brings us to new business, item 10A, discussion of updating the Code of Conduct and Ethics Policy for elected and appointed officials and consideration of appointing council members to an ad hoc subcommittee. Jeff, is there a staff report on this, or are we just going to go directly into discussion?
I thought we would just go into discussion, but be happy to answer any questions, as I have a lot of experience on this particular item, having worked on the original version that was done maybe 15 years ago.
Since I was, I think, the original progenitor of this idea, although obviously the council has embraced it, at least to talk about it, to put it on the agenda, I just think that it would be worthwhile to review this. It's always worthwhile to review this kind of statute on a periodic basis in light of how it actually works in practice. It's been a while since that was done. That's the main reason why I'd like to suggest that we do it. Personally, I like the idea of the subcommittee approach, and I would really hope that if we go that route, that the subcommittee will take advantage of being able to work with staff on reviewing exact instances of where various elements of the policy, the current policy, have been used and whatnot, and maybe look at what some other communities do, and sort of synthesize some changes or whatever recommendations they want to make to come back. But that's kind of the basis of it. I think it's good to regularly look at this stuff, and the subcommittee allows more in-depth discussion to come back to the full council so that it will inform our discussion.
Mr. Chair, I would like to volunteer to be on the subcommittee.
You sure you want to be punished that way, Ron? No, that's fine.
I'd like to support Ron's request.
Support Ron.
And I would just, I think it's a great idea, and I think we can. I'd love to just move forward with this, and I think it's a good opportunity to update these types of things.
Okay, good. Is there anybody else who other comments people want to make, or volunteers that want to step forward? So Ron's not the only person on the subcommittee. We really should have two people. So, and I have to say that it would be, I think, a fitting balance to have, an old salt like Ron and one of the newer council members as well. So that lets me out.
And this won't take long, will it? It's like
we'd be happy to provide food to the subcommittee as well, if that.
Then I come in.
I'm in.
I'm afraid Laura beat you to it.
Maybe the first time I've ever lost in a quest for food.
Are you okay
You're
with
welcome
that?
to it, Adam. It's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead, Laura. It's all yours.
All right. So, Jeff, do we have a motion to appoint two people? Or okay.
Yeah, I think you would make a motion to appoint those two and have a vote.
Okay.
All right. I move to appoint council members Laura Palmer Lohan and Ronald Collins to the Code of Conduct Ad Hoc Subcommittee.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion or comment? Hope the menu's good. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
And Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
All right. That brings us to any additional council communications and announcements, reflections and agenda setting. Hang on a second. Sorry, Jeff, I just noticed that we didn't, because we didn't have any submitted items for agenda discussion, so there's no item, okay. All right, well, if folks don't mind, this isn't a reflection, it's agenda setting, and Greg, stop me if I'm wrong here. This is where I wanted to bring up the idea of seeing if there was support to ask the Transportation and Circulation Commission to look into the 2300 Howard situation that was discussed with us.
And if I may, I would endorse that approach. I think that's the appropriate approach to handle that particular inquiry that we heard from earlier, would be to refer it to Public Works and TNC. So
don't take this wrong, but I want the guy sitting next to you to say it's okay that we're doing it this way.
I agree from both a policy and a legal standpoint.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I'm in favor of that, but I was going to bring up something else. So.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We will come back to you. So is folks generally, I'm seeing heads nod, so,
Yes.
All right, fine.
Just one question. We're talking about just looking into the issue more broadly.
Letting
the TNC look at the issue broadly in terms of this speeding traffic issue that's going on there.
When you say broadly, the only reason that I'm hesitating about broadly
Speaker brought up a very specific request that they put in.
No, but
and so I want to understand that, whether we were asking to look at that specific request or more broadly at addressing the traffic issues on that street.
Fair question. I was looking at it as looking at the traffic issues on that street, but not more broadly as in throughout the entire community.
No, just on that street. Yeah, right. I got it. Then I'm in favor of that.
Okay, good. Laura?
So a resident brought to my attention kind of this idea around, again, I know staff has an occasion to follow bills that are coming out of the legislature, and there's one currently being authored by Chu and I believe Mullen around financing and housing development. So I thought it would be curious if there could maybe, one of the things that I keep coming back to with respect to this affordable housing issue is the fact that there's a delta between who's going to pay, right, if you will, the difference between a below market rate unit and a market rate unit. Somebody's going to have to pay for that difference, right? And the financing piece continues to vex me around the creation of these units. So if there are any legislation coming forward that could potentially support the creation of financing for these types of things, I think it would be worthwhile for us to take a look at and potentially advocate for as a council.
I certainly like the idea of, if I'm understanding correctly, being kept abreast of that. I'm looking at Greg again. Is it okay we have this discussion and it results in something, or should this? I guess you're not actually asking to agendize a specific thing. You're just saying you'd like us to be kept abreast of this. Okay.
Correct, and in similar fashion like we've done in the past, right? If there's a want to actually endorse a bill that's coming through, that we then agendize that. I think that's what we've done in the past. Is that correct, Jeff?
That's correct. I'm interpreting this as general direction as opposed to a specific agenda setting item, just saying that you'd have an interest to see those types of bills brought back for consideration of support.
I certainly support that because I think the topic's important. Ron?
Yeah, I was just thinking on both the Samtrans board and the Caltrain board, we have one of the agenda items every meeting is a legislative update. Now, those are obviously all transportation-related things. I'm just wondering, maybe we could, I don't know if we put this as a regular agenda item, but maybe a report from staff that if there are these housing-related issues that are, sort of making their way through the legislature, that, we just be informed about them, and then we can decide if we want to put something on the agenda.
I'd be happy to take care of that for you.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Then in that case, if I can add a further thing on, and it actually falls under housing. And that is, I caught wind today of there was a trailer bill. I think it's 100 or 101 that went through the ledge and was signed, and it actually creates it impacts housing policy. Obviously, from my description, I'm not understanding it really well, and I would like to really understand it better, and I suspect the council probably would too. So I'd add that to the hopper of legislative things that are going on that it would be nice for us to be aware of.
Sounds good. I'll have our assistant city manager follow up with you, try to get a little more detail so we can hone in on that.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else? Jeff, any reflections, comments from staff?
I just wanted to remind the council, no, not really, I'm just kidding, not the council, I'm pretty sure you guys know, but the public, that our next two regular city council meetings are canceled, and the council will be getting together again for their next regular meeting on Monday, August 26th.
And that's a great lead into, with that, we are adjourned. Sorry to close session. Thank you, Adam, and we will return back here after that.
We do not, since the closed session is the notice as a special meeting in the other room, we can just adjourn from there.